I'm going to show you guys how to 3D model in Maya. This is an absolute beginner's tutorial, so you don't need any previous knowledge. I'm going to take you step by step on how to model this basic sword. I use very little time lapse in this video, but instead explain exactly what I'm doing every step of the way. I know this video is long, but I promise you that if you're serious about learning modeling, the skills I'm about to teach you are invaluable. I want to respect your time, so I'm going to let you know that the first 10 minutes of the video are going to be all about learning the basics of Maya. After that, the remainder of this video, I'll teach you how to model this sword. Okay, let's get started. Okay guys, when you first open up Maya, it should look like this, and you can go ahead to the top left and click on New for a new project. It'll open up a new scene for you, and the first thing I want you to do, just to learn some of the aspects of Maya, is to go up here to the top left and click on this orange cube. There's a little icon right here. And if you click on that, it'll insert a cube into your scene. Okay, now that we have a cube, I'm going to show you how to navigate around your scene and move the camera. So the first thing you'll want to do is click and hold the Alt button on your keyboard. And if you're holding down the Alt button and left click with your mouse, you can drag and it will turn the camera around your scene. And you can see that we can look at the cube from all angles. Then I want you to use your middle mouse wheel. And with the mouse wheel, you can zoom in and out of the object you have selected. Then if you want to move around to a different place in your scene, you can hold down Alt and the mouse wheel. And then if you drag your mouse while holding down Alt and the mouse wheel, you can actually pan to different places in your scene. But let's say that you pan away or you zoom really far in and out or something like this, and you get totally lost and you don't know how to get back to your object. You're looking around, you can't find it. You can just press the F key on your keyboard, and F will zoom you all the way back in to your object. Alright, so now you know the basic camera controls to navigate in Maya. But now we're going to learn the basic ways that we can manipulate an object in Maya. So you'll notice right now that our cube is very small and it's partially clipping through the floor of the scene. So if we want to move our cube, you can press the W key on your keyboard or click this little icon on the left. Then you can click on these arrows that pop up and drag your object. If you want to make your object larger or smaller, you can scale it by pressing the R key or this little icon on the left. Then you'll see we have these new handlebars that pop up. If you click on the yellow one that's right in the middle, this will let you scale the entire object. So you can make it bigger or make it much smaller. If you want to only scale a certain direction, you can click on these other handlebars like this. And now we've got a long rectangle. If you'd like to rotate your object, you can press the E key or this little icon here on the left, and this will come up with a little circle icon, and you can click on these different parts of the icon to rotate your object in the scene. And then if you're ever in one of these modes but you just want to return to the normal mouse mode, you can click Q on your keyboard or click the little mouse icon up here in the top left. Okay, the next important thing to learn are the different modes that you can be in Maya. So right now our object is selected and you see how it has a green outline around the edges. That means that we're in object mode. If you put your mouse on the object and right click and hold the right click, you'll see that there's the option for object mode. That's what we currently are in. But if you're right clicking and holding, you can change to one of these other modes. So let's go ahead and change to face mode by dragging the mouse over the face option and then letting go. So now the faces are blue, and if you put your mouse over it, you'll see it highlights individual faces of your object. So I'm going to go ahead and click this face. And now, just like before, we're going to click the R key to scale. And if I scale, you'll see that now we can scale just a certain face of our object like this. Next, we're going to go into vertex mode. So put your mouse over the object and then right click and hold. Then drag over to the vertex option. Once vertex is selected, you'll see that there's these little dots that are on all the corners of your model. These are called vertexes. And if you click on one of these dots, it will become yellow like this. Once a vertex is highlighted yellow, you can manipulate that individual vertex. So I could do something like this, or I could drag it down. Just in any direction we can manipulate it. But let's say that we wanted to actually do multiple vertexes at the same time. Well, if we click on one of them and then hold the shift key on our keyboard and then click on another one, it'll highlight both of them, and now we can move two vertexes at the same time. Okay, and the last one I'm going to show you guys is, again, let's right click on our object and drag over to edge mode. Just like the name implies, edge mode will allow you to select individual edges. So if I select this edge and then use W to do the move tool, I can move this edge in a direction that I would like this. Alright guys, we're almost ready to get started on our first model. But before that, there's a couple tools you'll want to know to be able to get started in Maya. I know it can be pretty overwhelming when you look at all the different UI options and all the different tools that Maya has to offer, but there's really only about like 4 or 5 different tools you need to know to get started with modeling. Okay, so for our first essential tool, I want you guys to come up here to the top and click on the Mesh Tools tab right here. Then you'll see we have all these different options we can click on. We're going to look at the Insert Edge Loop tool. So click on that, and you'll see that this icon here on the left switched to the Edge Loop tool. Edge Loop tool will let you add in edges around your entire object. So if I wanted to add an edge in the middle of this cube, I can simply click on the edge and then drag it to where I want to insert these new edges. Okay, and just like that, if you look around, we have a whole new edge loop. Our next essential tool is called extrude. But before we use the extrude tool, I'm going to switch back into face mode. So I'm going to right click and go down to face. And then I'm going to select this face right here on the left. Once you have a face selected, you can go up here to the top and click on Edit Mesh. Then go down to the Extrude tool right here. With this Extrude tool selected, we can now click on these handlebars, and you'll see that we actually pull out new geometry from our object. Extrude is a super helpful tool and will make your life much easier when modeling. An even easier way to extrude is to select a face, then click W for the move tool, but before you click on one of these handlebars, hold down the shift key on your keyboard. Then when you drag these, it'll automatically extrude for you without you having to go into the options. Another thing you may want to do with your object is to duplicate it, and duplicating it is actually super simple. Simply click the W key to go back to your move tool, and then hold the shift key before you click and drag, and this will duplicate your object entirely. Another really helpful tool is the mirror tool. If you go up here to the top and go to mesh and then down to mirror, you can mirror your object over an axis. If you accidentally mirror your object over the incorrect axis, like let's say this, all you need to do is go to this little pop-up box and click on axis, and you can choose which axis you'd like to mirror your object over. One tool that's similar to inserting an edge loop but will allow you to have a little bit more control is the multi-cut tool. If you come up to the top left and click on Mesh Tools and then Multi-Cut, you can access this tool. Let's say that I wanted to add some edges around my object, but I didn't want them to be nice and even like the edge loop tool would do. In that case, I can come and click on one of these lines with my multi-cut tool, and it will insert a vertex. And then if I click on another edge, it'll insert another vertex and an edge. And we can just continue to do this all the way around our model, making whatever kind of pattern we want to. The one thing you do need to be careful about when doing this tool is that if you don't make sure that all of your sides have 4 sides and are quads, that will create geometry problems for you later on. So just make sure that if you do use the multi-cut tool, that all of your polygons still have 4 sides. For example, this one, if we go to edge, it still has 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see it's still a 4-sided polygon. And lastly, we're going to go over the target weld tool. But before we use it, you'll want to switch into vertex mode. Once you're in vertex mode, go up to mesh tools at the top and then click target weld. This will allow you to merge 2 vertexes into one. So if I wanted to combine this vertex over to this vertex, I would simply click on this one and then drag till it highlighted both of them. And then just like that, it merged them into one vertex. And then I could do it over here on the other side as well, and it's manipulated our geometry. And with all these tools, guys, you can actually access them through a shortcut by clicking and holding the spacebar key on your mouse. And you'll see that we see the edit mesh, mesh tools, mesh display, all these options that are up here at the top. We can just make them appear by holding down the spacebar key. So let's say if I wanted to access the edge loop tool, I could hold down spacebar, click mesh tools, and then go down to insert edge loop. And now I'm right into my edge loop tool super fast. Okay, now I'm going to show you guys how you can create your first model in Maya. For this tutorial, we're going to make a basic sword. Something that you should always get in the habit of as an artist is finding reference images before you start making an art project. Google Images is not always the best place to find reference images for things. I like to use Pinterest and ArtStation a lot, and this particular sword image I found on Pinterest. If you want to follow along exactly, I'll leave a link to this image in the description so that you can download it yourself. But feel free to find your own sword image online. Just make sure that it's in an exact up and down view or side to side view, not at an angle like this. The most ideal thing would be to have an image of its front like this, but also of its side, showing the edge of the blade. But we'll make do with just this image. So you'll want to make a folder or somewhere where you can place the image that's easy for you to remember and navigate to on your computer. It could even just be right onto your desktop. But I've made a folder here called Modeling References. So I'm going to open up my folder and I'm going to drag my image that I'm going to use as a reference into my folder. And if I click on it, it pulls up perfectly. You can also rename the image if you want so that it's easy to recognize. Then back in Maya, I'm going to hit File, New Scene, and I'm not going to save this. Okay, now that we've opened up a new scene, we're going to want to insert our reference image. And to do that, we're going to want to lock it onto a certain plane of view. So to lock it onto a front view, we can tap the space bar on our keyboard and you'll see that all these different viewports open up. Down at the very bottom of each viewport, it says what viewport angle this is. So our main one is perspective, but there's also a top view, a front view, and a side view. For our purposes, we're going to want to go into the front view. So put your mouse over the front view viewport and then tap the space bar again. Now we're locked into a front view of our scene. Now to open up our reference image, we'll want to go up here to this little icon that says View. Then go down to Image Plane and Import Image. This will open up a file browser and you can go back to wherever you put that image and select it. So in my case, I come back to Modeling References and click on this, and I'll even show you a preview of the image that you select, and then you can hit Open. Great, now we have our reference image into Maya. So if you press spacebar again and then drag your mouse back over to perspective view and press spacebar, you'll see that we have our reference image here in the scene as a plane. What I like to do is press W to access your move tool, and then I like to move my reference image all the way to the edge of this grid floor. And you can, it doesn't have to be exact, but I like to get it near the edge like this. Then you can move it upwards until the bottom of it reaches the grid as well. Okay guys, once you have your reference image in the right place you want it to be at, you might want to make it so that your reference image is unselectable The reason why you would do that is so that once you're actually making a model, you're not accidentally clicking on your reference image all the time and accidentally moving it or scaling it. So to make it so you won't be able to select the reference image anymore, what you can do is go over here to the right and you'll be on attribute editor probably by default. But there's also another one here called channel box and layer editor. If you don't have this on your Maya, you're going to want to click this little icon right up here at the top, and it should open up your channel box and layer editor. Then you can come down here to this layers tab, and there'll be these little icons right here that will let you create and move layers. So what you're going to want to do is make sure that your reference image is selected, and then go to this far right one, and if you hover over it, it says create new layer and assign selected object. So if I click on this, it makes me a new layer, and the object I have selected is in that new layer. And then all you have to do is, you'll see these letters right here, but on this third box there'll be no letter. Click on this box over and over until it says R. R stands for reference. So if you click until it says R, then you'll notice that if you click off your object, now I can't select my object anymore, which is perfect for a reference image. But if you for some reason did need to go back and edit it again, then simply click on this little box again until it's blank, and now I can select it again. Okay guys, now we're finally to the fun part, and let's start modeling our object. The first thing I want you to do, just like before, is come up to the top left and click on the cube icon to insert a cube into the scene. Then drag that cube up, and we're going to choose which area we want to start modeling on. I think for this model, I'm going to start on the blade first, and then we'll do the handle for last. So once you have your cube dragged up somewhere around here, you can click on the spacebar again, and then move your mouse over to the front view and click spacebar. This will lock us into the front view once again. Once we're in this view, the goal is to match up our object with the reference image and make it look as close to it as possible. So the first thing I'm going to do is click the R key to scale, and I'm going to try to scale my cube here so that it matches up with the reference image. And you'll notice that our reference image is actually slightly off center. So I'm going to turn off the reference on our layer again and try to center the image a little bit better before we start. There we go. Now the reference image is centered, and I'm going to turn the R option back on so that we can't select the reference image. Okay, back to the cube. So what I'm going to do here is press the R key for scaling, and once I feel like the edges match up with the edges on the sword, then I'm going to scale in the vertical direction. And you'll see that we have like an entire blade now. If we go back to W to move, we can continue to line this up where we want it with the sword. Okay, and let's say that I wanted to grab this face down here and pull it down to the place that I wanted to, but only that face. I could press spacebar and then go back into perspective view by pressing spacebar with my mouse over it. And then to get this face, we can right click and hold and go into face mode. Then click on that face, and now that it's selected, we can press spacebar and go back into front view with spacebar, and then I can drag it down and line it up perfectly just like that. Okay, and an important thing I want you guys to remember while modeling is that you can't only think about your object from the view that you're looking at with your reference. You have to think about how it should look from all sides. So currently we know that the side of the sword should be very thin because that's the blade, but right now it's very thick compared to the front view. So I'm going to select the whole object we have here, and then I'm going to click on the R button to scale, and I'm going to scale it this way until it's very, very thin. Like possibly, for now, we'll just leave it like this. So it's looking a little bit more accurate, but still very box-like. Okay, so let's go back into that front view again. Now, we're going to want to add some edge loops so that we can get the details on the geometry, especially on these edges and these edges. And you'll also notice that as we get to the top of the sword, it comes in at an angle. Okay, so what I'm going to do is select our cube, and then I'm going to hold the spacebar and go to Mesh Tools and Insert Edge Loop. Once I have that selected, I'm going to click on the edge and try to line it up right where these edge details are on my reference. So I'll put one right here, and I will put one right here. Now I'll show you a couple of nice tricks that you can use so you don't always have to be switching between the front view and the perspective view. One thing that you can do to make it easier to see your reference through your model is by coming up here to this little icon. It's very small, but it's called wireframe. And if you click on it, now you'll see your object is invisible. You only see the edges of it. And while we're in wireframe view, we can click and hold the right mouse button and go into vertex mode. With vertex mode selected, I can click and drag to make a little box, and it will select everything that's within that box. Just make sure that you are out of your edge loop tool and you're just in the normal mouse, and then go to vertex, and then click and drag, and then it should highlight both of these vertexes. And then if I click on R, I can scale these vertexes, and I can scale them outwards like this. But you'll notice that there's a problem, right? If we scale out to these edges, now our whole sword has been scaled, and we've got a lot of unnecessary thickness that we didn't want before. So before we scale it, we actually should add in a couple more edge loops. So I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. So by going back into my edge loop tool, I can add edge loops right at the places where I want this area to start thickening up. So if we look at the model, it looks like right about here is where it starts becoming thick. So I'm going to add an edge loop right here. And then on the opposite side as well, it looks like it starts thickening up right about here. So I'm going to add another edge loop here. And for our one down here as well, let's also add some edge loops where it begins to get thick. Okay, now that we have these in place, let's once again go into select object mode, into vertex mode, and select those vertexes that we want to scale. And then click on R, and now we can scale these vertexes to those edge points, and the geometry is looking much better than before. And let's do that as well for these lower ones. So I'm going to select both of these by clicking and dragging while I'm in vertex mode, and then I'm going to scale these out. Okay, so now it should look like this. But let's go into perspective mode and make sure that this is looking right. Okay, so this is what our model looks like in a 3D view now. We're starting to get some of those details, but it's still pretty blocky, so we're going to add some more. But to add in the tip of the blade, let's go ahead and right click and then go into face mode. Now we're going to click on that top face and switch back into our front view. With this face selected, we can click W to do the move tool and hold down the shift key. And if we are holding down the shift key when we click the handlebar, we'll be able to extrude and create new geometry. So we're going to extrude all the way to that tip of the sword right there. But while our face is still selected, we can click R to scale, and then we're going to scale it this direction until it matches up close to our reference. Like this. There we go. So now if we look at it, it's looking very good, looking quite sword-like. But one thing that we're still lacking is a very sharp looking edge to our sword. And you'll notice that on the reference image, there's a clear line down the middle that splits the two halves of the sword where the edges come in. So to create this effect and to add in this center line, we're going to use an edge loop. But we want to make sure that this edge loop is perfectly centered. So I'm going to show you a trick on how to do that. First, let's go back into our front view. Okay, to make sure we get this right, I'm going to turn wireframe off for a second and select our object. Then, instead of just inserting an edge loop, we're going to click on the mesh tools and we're going to go to insert edge loop, but we're actually going to click on this little box that's next to insert an edge loop. And this will bring up the properties of the tool. Okay, once you have this pop-up window, you'll see a few different options, and we're gonna click on the multiple edge loop option. If you select that, it'll let you insert a number of edge loops you want right here. Go ahead and select that, but switch it from 2 to 1. Now what this is gonna do is make Maya place that edge loop perfectly in the center of whatever edge you click on. So now you'll see that if I click on an edge right here, even if I'm not clicking right in the middle, let's say I'm clicking way over here, it's going to want to put that line right through the middle like this. And if you let go, now we have a perfectly centered edge loop through our object. But make sure that before you close out of this, you hit reset tool, so that when you're adding more edge loops in the future, if you don't want to add them centered, you just need to hit reset on this tool. Alright guys, I think we're ready to add in the edge of our blades. So go ahead and press spacebar and go back into perspective view. So now that we have the geometry of that center line right here, we're going to want to select our sides so that we can make them nice and small and sharp. So right click and then go into face view. So we want to select all the faces up through here, but instead of holding shift and clicking on all of them individually, we can do this much faster by holding shift and clicking the one on the bottom that we want, the starting one, and then go to the ending one that you want to select, which will be this for us, and then hold shift again and double click with your mouse. If you do that correctly, it'll select all of the faces right here on the side, but not any faces that we don't want. Perfect. Now let's do that with the other side as well. So if we look at this side and we hold shift on this one, and then we come up here and make sure we're holding shift and double click, we now have all of these sides selected without anything we don't want selected to be selected. We probably will want the very tip of it to be scaled as well, so you can also hold shift and then just click on these two little guys right there. Okay, great. So now I'm going to look at it from this side with all of our edges selected, and I'm going to press R to scale, and then we're going to scale these in this direction. Now we want these edges to come very close together because this is our blade, but we don't want them to quite touch or overlap. They can just be something like this. And now if we look at it, we've got our sword going. It seems like maybe the middle edge could come out more. So what I'm going to do is right click and go into edge mode, and then go ahead and double click on your edge so it selects it all the way around. It should just select the middle edge if you double click on it. Okay, now with that selected, we're going to hit R again to scale, and now we can choose just how thick we want this to be. So if we look at this and we scale it, this is where it would be nice to have a second reference image, but we're just going to have to make our best artistic guess here. So I'm going to say that it's going to be about this thick. Alright guys, it's looking pretty good. We need to add in a few more edge loops so that it's still not quite as blocky. So let's go back into our front view and let's turn on wireframe again. Now we can hold spacebar, click mesh tools, and insert edge loop. I'm going to start adding in some edge loops at place where I know we need to manipulate the geometry, such as right here, right here. We'll put one right here, and we'll put one right here. Don't go too crazy on adding in edge loops, or else things will get a little bit too complicated too quickly. But once you have the ones in that you want to start on, you can go into edge mode, and then make sure that you're also in your selection and not still in edge loop mode. And you can double click to select those edges you inserted. Then click R, and then you can scale them. So go ahead and scale them so they match with the reference image as closely as possible. Those ones I scaled in, but this one I'm actually going to scale out a bit so it's a little bit more rounded of a top. And you'll see this already looks much better. Now you could keep going crazy with the details, but since this is a beginner tutorial and we have limited time, I'm not going to go too much more into details on the blade. Okay, now let's start thinking about how we're going to approach the handle. We always could brute force it and select these faces like this and extrude them, but the problem with that is the shape of the handle is much different than the shape of our blade, and we really want it to be cylindrical. So there's actually a smarter way of going about this. Let's undo those moves, and instead what we're going to want to look at is how many sides the bottom of our blade has. And this can be a little bit tricky because you need to make sure you're counting every single side. So if we go into edge mode, we can actually count this. We go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6 edges. We're not counting this edge because if we got rid of this geometry, this edge would disappear. So essentially we have 6 edges. What that tells us is that when we make our handle, it should also have 6 edges on the top and on the bottom. So the best way that we can do this is to insert some new geometry into the scene. So I'm going to go up here to the left again, but instead of clicking on the cube icon this time, we're going to click on create, because this is going to let us control exactly how many sides our new object will have. So go to create and then go to polygon primitives, and you'll see cylinder. But instead of clicking on cylinder, we're going to click on that little box to the right. Now we'll have a menu come up with a bunch of different options. What we're going to be focused on is this one that says axis divisions. Right now it's at 10, but we're going to highlight that and click 6 instead, and then hit apply and create. Alright, now that we have our new cylinder in here, let's make absolutely sure that the top and bottom of it has 6 sides. If we count our edges, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's perfect. That's exactly what we want for this. We're going to go into object mode, and then we're going to move it up by our model, and then click spacebar and go back into that front view again. From here, we can press R to scale our cylinder and make it much more like the reference image. So I'm going to scale it down until it's very small like this. But the important part here is that we get it to match up with the reference. So I'm going to scale it in the vertical direction. So it should look something like this, and it's in wireframe mode. But if we look at it from here, we can see that we already have the start of our handle. So while we're here in perspective mode, I'm going to take the opportunity to select our cylinder and then select face mode. While in face mode, I'm going to click on all of these faces on the top, and once they're selected, I'm just going to hit delete, the delete key. That will completely remove those faces from our object, but we're not going to need those faces because after extruding, we're eventually going to connect it up to right here on our model. Okay, with those faces gone, we're going to go into edge mode and make sure the entire top of the edge is selected. Then we can go back into our front view and click the W key for the move tool. Then, just like I explained before, if you hold shift before you click on your move tool handlebar, it'll let you extrude. So we're going to extrude until we get to right about here, because that's where it kind of bows outwards. We don't want to just scale it in the horizontal direction. We probably want to scale this in all directions from the look of the reference image. So I'm going to hit Control Z, and instead I'm going to click this middle one to scale it out. And we're going to match it up right like this with the reference. Okay, so next we're going to switch back into the move tool with W, hold shift again, and we're going to extrude once again until we get to about right here. And then we're going to go back to scale and scale it down again to match up with our reference. Now we could make this whole entire fancy ornamental thing that we have going on right here with the gem, but for the sake of this tutorial, since it's a beginner's tutorial, we're not going to worry about all of that detail. We're just going to try to get in all of the basic geometry that we need for our model. Okay, so I'm going to hold shift once again to extrude, and we're going to pull this up right about here, And then once again, we're going to scale in all directions and scale it out like this to somewhat match it up with our reference, maybe something like this. Okay, now we're in an interesting point because we need to model this handguard right here, but instead of modeling both sides of it and try to make them match up completely, we actually can model just a single side of it and then mirror our entire object. But before we model the guard at all, I think we should connect our blade to our new handle object. I'm noticing that on the blade, this doesn't quite match up with the model. So real quick, I'm just gonna make a quick fix by going into vertex mode and selecting all these vertexes down here, and then going into scale and scaling them sideways until they match up a little bit better with our reference. Okay, we're gonna wanna make sure that all of these edges are selected again on the handle. So I'm gonna go into perspective and then go to edge and double click just to make sure all of our edges are selected here. And then I'm gonna hold down the shift key and drag the handlebar to extrude again. And this time we're gonna be matching this up pretty closely to our blade here, but we're not actually gonna pull the edge all the way to the end of the blade. Instead, we're gonna leave a little bit of a gap, maybe like this. Okay, so for the next part, we're gonna go back into perspective view, and now we're gonna wanna delete that geometry that's on the bottom of our blade. So we're gonna go into face mode. I'm gonna select these two by holding shift so I can select both of them and then clicking the delete key. So now you'll notice that on both of the objects, the faces are gone because we deleted them, and they both have 6 edges around them. Even though the edges are in different places, it's still 6 edges on both. But there is one more thing that we're going to need to do before we can truly combine these two objects. And that's using the option to combine. So what we're going to do is hold the right mouse button down and go into object mode. And then if you click and drag, you'll see that we can select both of these objects at the same time. The only issue is one of them will be white and one of them will be green. This means that Maya is treating them as 2 separate objects. So to change this, we're going to go up to mesh at the top, and then we're going to go to this option that says combine. Once you click that, they'll both be green, and this will allow us to combine these 2 objects. I am noticing one issue though before we do so, and that's that this is quite a bit thicker than the edges right here on our blade. So I'm just going to quickly go into edge mode, double click these, and scale them in just in this direction a little bit so that once we fill the hole, it will look a little bit better. Okay, just like that. So now what you're going to want to do is you need to have every single edge selected that's going to be fused together. So you're going to want to make sure that you're in edge mode, and then you're going to double click on this edge of the handle, and you're going to hold shift and double click on this edge around the blade. Okay, once you have all of these edges selected, you're going to want to go up here to the top and click on edit mesh and then bridge. When you click this, Maya is going to automatically try to connect all of those edges that you created in the best way that it knows how. Sometimes it does a good job, sometimes it does a poor job. So once this happens, we can actually adjust these with this little box that comes up right here. So let's say that you didn't like which edge is connected to which edge on the other side. You could go over to this little thing that says twist, and if you hover over the text, you'll see these little arrows, and if you drag side to side, you can actually change which direction it'll connect to. But if you twist too much, it'll get all twisted and messed up, so be careful with that option. But even though this looks a little wonky, this is going to be good enough for me for right now. So I'm just going to go back into object mode, and that box should disappear. Let's zoom out and see what it's looking like. Okay, this is looking like a legitimate sword now, but we still need to add in this guard right here. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to the front view for just a second, and then I'm going to go into the vertex mode and select all of these vertexes here and move them up just ever so slightly so that they line up with this edge of the handle. And now from here, my thinking is that I should select the edges right around here to extrude and create this guard. So going back into perspective view, we can take a look at those specific edges, which should be right here and here. So if I click and go to edge mode, you got to make sure that you press Q or select this, or excuse me, not edge mode, face mode. You can select these two faces right here. Okay, so I'm going to go back into the side view and then click W and hold shift before I drag to extrude. Alright, this is looking pretty funky, right? Doesn't look quite right. If we look even from this angle, this is looking a bit strange. But don't worry, because we're going to fix it. First of all, I think I might scale it in this way because we know it should be getting pretty thin. Maybe something like this. Since we have an edge loop right here and right here, I think what we should try to do is scale these faces right here and here because they're just very large. So I'm going to click this one, and then I'm going to click shift and click this one. I'm going to click R and scale, and you can see we can actually scale these down a bit. Okay, even with that, it's still looking a bit wonky. So maybe this is a time that we will actually move some individual vertexes. So I'm going to go into vertex mode and click this one, and then hold shift, click this one, and then we're going to make these come together a little bit closer. Alright, and then these edges still don't look very good, so I'm going to click edge, select these two, and then move these up a bit. Okay, that looks slightly better. Maybe still not perfect, but we'll make it work. Okay, so I'm going to go back into our side view here and go into vertex mode. Then I'm going to select these vertexes here, and kind of move them with the move tool to get a little bit better geometry to what we have here. And then I'm going to hold spacebar, mesh tools, insert edge loop, and we're going to add in an edge loop somewhere along here. But you'll notice that it added it in at this very funky, weird angle. So if we go back to perspective, you'll see that it doesn't look straight. So what I'm going to do to straighten it is I'm going to go into edge mode and make sure you're just on selection, and you can double click that so it's selected, and then hit the scale tool with R, and then if I actually click this sideways one and drag it all the way to the left, it's actually going to straighten out that edge loop, so it's a nice circle again. Okay, with that straightened out, we're going to go back here into front view, and then we'll select that edge, and then we can start manipulating it a little bit here. So I'm going to try to line it up kind of like this with the reference. Alright, then we're going to want to add in another edge loop so that we can get this little piece of the geometry. So I'm going to go back to my edge loop tool, and then I'm going to click to add another one right about here, but make sure again to go into your scale and then drag all the way to the left so that it's aligned like that. But I'm also going to rotate this one. So I'm going to click E, and then on this big outer blue circle, I'm going to rotate it maybe quite far like this and drag it out. This isn't the only way to do this. This is maybe a bad way to do this, but we're going to roll with it. I'm going to continue dragging it till it's at quite an angle, and then you'll notice that if we go into scale, the problem is if we want to scale outwards, it's going to do it at kind of a weird angle because the handlebar is straight up while this is angled. So instead, while we have it all selected, we're going to go up to this little hammer tool in the top right, and then we're going to click on edit pivot, which is right here. And then we can actually choose how we want our pivot to be lined up, and we can line it up with that edge. And then go ahead and exit out of that, and then go back to your scale, and then you'll notice that you can scale it properly now. So I'm going to scale it so it looks kind of like this. We're going to want to add in at least one more edge loop to match up with our reference. So I'm going to, real quick, I'm going to go into vertex and select these vertexes. But I'm also going to go back to this hammer and hit reset for our pivot. Then exit out of this. And then I'm going to move this so it's a little bit more uniform with the rest of the model. Okay, great. And then we'll go back into insert edge loop, and we'll put one right over here somewhere, but then we'll scale it so it goes straight. And then with this, I'm looking at the bottom right here. I'm going to match that up first, and then I'm going to go into vertex mode and select these upper vertexes right here and scale them down to match more with the reference. You may need to kind of move around some of your other vertexes as well so that it's not wonky. But there we go. We have a very, very basic version of this handle. Let's look at it in 3D. Okay, yeah. Nothing too special with this. It's a little bit hard to add in all the details when we're just working with low geometry, but at least we have something that does work. Okay, now before we mirror this, let's go ahead and add the little pummel at the bottom. Maybe before we add the pummel, we should add a little bit more shape to the main part of the handle. So I'm going to add in a couple of edge loops. Okay, once you have those in, you can just go into vertex mode and select the whole group of vertexes on these. Make sure that you're out of your edge loop tool, and then you can select vertexes and scale them in to match up more with the reference. Okay, that's looking a little bit better. We have a bunch more of a curve here to our handle. Okay guys, let's go ahead and work on this bottom part of our sword, the pummel right here. So I think we're gonna look underneath here and select all of the faces that we can see right here at the bottom of the sword. Okay, great. And then we're going to press spacebar and go back into our front view. And then we'll go to the move tool with W and then hold shift to extrude once again. And I'm going to scale it out in all directions, just like this. And then you can go back to W, move, extrude, and then scale it. It's okay if you don't get all the details right now, because you can always go back in and add more edge loops that you need. So we're just going to continue this for the rest of it, like this. Okay, now let's press spacebar and go back into our perspective mode. And there we go, that's starting to look good. Okay, let's just take a look all the way around at this pummel part here at the bottom. It looks like it's a slightly more thick on the side than it is on the front. Yeah, if you look from the bottom view, you can see that it's not exactly perfectly round like we would want it to be. So to fix this, we can easily just right click and hold and go into face mode, and then I'm going to drag and select all of these faces. So it should select all the faces right here. The reason why we don't want to select these faces is because they need to be pushed and moved a little bit. And if we selected them, it would affect these faces right here, which we don't want. So if we do that and then we look kind of at this bottom view again, we can scale just those faces until we get to a point where it looks more circular, or I guess in this case kind of a hexagon. So there we go. Now it looks much more even all the way around the model. But now that I'm looking at it, I think this little section might need it as well. So I'm going to highlight just these faces around, and then Might be hard to get a good perspective view of this, but I'm just going to scale it in this way a little bit. Yeah, just like that. Okay, we're just about ready to mirror our object so that we can mirror this side of the handle to this side. But before we do that, I am noticing that there's a bit more curve to the blade of the sword that we didn't really get. We didn't really put enough geometry in for kind of a thicker part right here. And I think that's kind of important to this model. So maybe we'll add that before we mirror it. So to do that, I'm going to press spacebar and go back into the front view. And we have it in wireframe, which is good. And then let's go ahead and add an edge loop. So we'll go to hold spacebar, mesh tools, insert edge loop, and then we can put one in. I'm actually not sure where the thick part is. So let's just add one in, let's say right there, and then go hit Q, go back into edge mode. And now that that's selected, we can scale and scale this to where it should be. So to me, it looks like the thickest part is probably more like right here. So I'm gonna hit W to move up this edge loop to the thick part, and then we'll go like that, and then we'll scale and scale right into there. And then we probably want an edge loop down here in the skinnier part. So I'm gonna click back on the edge loop tool, and then we'll add one in here in the more skinny part of the sword. And it looks like maybe this edge could be adjusted too. So sometimes you just have to play around with it a little bit. And it might not perfectly match the reference on every side, but just do the best that you can. Okay, and maybe we'll go ahead and add a few tiny bit more edge loops, just add in a little bit more detail here to just make the sword look really nice. And there we go. I think that's looking a lot better. Let's look in the perspective view. Yeah, there we go. Now we actually have a bit of a thicker part right here in the upper half of the sword. Okay, now for the last thing we might need to fix before we mirror it is that we have a very clean line down the middle in the blade, but if you look at our handle, we actually don't have any edge down the middle of it, which is what we probably will need if we're going to mirror half of the object over. So I think what I'm going to do is use the multi-cut tool. I'm going to go to mesh tools and then come down to multi-cut. And then what we can do here is we can start right where this center line ends, and I'm going to click on this vertex right here. And now if you hold the shift key and hover over another edge, it'll let you place a new vertex perfectly in the center of that edge. So we're going to do that all the way down this sword. Okay, once you have it all the way around, it should look like this, and then you can just click Q and you'll see that we have an edge loop all the way around it. Now this did create a triangle right here, which is something we want to try to avoid, but we'll see if we can fix that at the end. So now what I'm going to do to mirror it is I'm going to delete half of the object and then mirror everything over from the right side to the left side. Okay, so I'll hold right click and then go into face mode, and then the best way to select half the object is to go back into our front view like this, and then we can very easily drag and make a box that just selects the stuff on the left half. Okay, so now we're gonna go back in perspective and see if it selected the correct edges. It looks like it did, but you really want to make sure on the bottom and the top that even these tiny little edges did get selected. You can hold shift to select the multiple edges. Okay, so that looks good. We got all the left side ones, and I'm gonna hit delete. So we've completely deleted half of our model. But don't worry, because we're going to go now into object mode, and then we're going to go to mesh and mirror. Okay, once it mirrors, take a look at the object, and we can actually change the distance of where it mirrors. So let's hit spacebar and go back into our front view and make sure that it still matches up properly with our reference. If it doesn't, we can go ahead and you can go to this option right here, offset. And if you hover over it, you'll see these arrows, and you can click and drag, and then you'll see that you can make the geometry farther or closer together in your mirror. But as far as this goes, it kind of looks to me like it did a good job, and it looks the way that it's supposed to. So I'm actually not going to change the offset for this. Okay, now our last thing is going to be to fix these triangles so that we don't have that kind of geometry. And luckily for us, I think this will work out pretty easily. We can just go to edge and then select that edge between the two triangles and click delete. And on the other side we can, oh, it looks like the other side doesn't have that problem. It doesn't have triangles. But since we deleted this edge, now this is a quad, because if we look at the edges, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Even though these edges almost look like they're just one edge, there's still two different edges. So our model is made up entirely of four-sided polygons, which is what you want. And you'll want to make sure that you save your model. So you can go up here to the top and click on File, and then Save Scene As. You click that. This box is where you can name your project. So I've already named it Sword Tutorial. And then the file type, you'll want to select Maya Binary, MB, right here. And then from here you can just choose wherever on your computer that you would like to save it to. So I've gone ahead and selected my Maya folder, and now I'm going to hit Save As, and it will save your project. One last thing that you will want to know in case you want to import your model into a game engine like Unreal Engine or Unity, you can export your model as an OBJ or an FBX. And those file types will allow you to import into a game engine. So you could go to File, and then make sure that your model is selected in object mode. And then you go to File, Export Selection, and then in the file type you can choose OBJ, which is right here, or you can choose FBX. So I'll choose OBJ and call this Sword Tutorial. And then you can go ahead and hit Export Selection. And now that OBJ or FBX file is something that you can easily open up in a game engine. If you guys have more questions for me about how to use Maya and how to use different tools, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I'd love to try to help you out. If you enjoyed this tutorial and I was able to help you, leaving a like on the video would help me out a lot. You can also subscribe to the channel for more tutorials in the future. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.